We are here. It's been way, way, way too long. This is Andrew. I am in Florida right now with the hurricane season. It's all rainy and muggy outside, but none of that matters because we are going back to the 70s, back to recording, back to filming, back with Bryan Lee on a new episode, new season of that 70s pod. Here he is from Wisconsin, that big old dairy state. Brian, it's so good to see you. Like, for real, it's so good to do this again. How are you today?
Well, we actually have a sunny day and it's summer here. We're not sitting in 3 feet of snow, although the winter wasn't too bad this past year. But with summer comes one of my favorite pastimes, and that's baseball. And today I'd like to talk about growing up as a kid in the 70s. And one of my fondest memories is going to Minnesota Twins games with my dad at Old Metropolitan Stadium in Bloomington, which no longer exists. They built this little store there called the Mall of America instead of having a baseball stadium. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Excellent. So we're going to rewind real quick. When was baseball first introduced to your life? Is that like the first sport? And was it Major League Baseball?
Well, I can remember playing t-ball as a little boy. So I would have been 5 years old, which would have been in the late 60s. And I can remember we played like maybe 5 or 6 games, and I only had one hit during the entire season. And believe it or not, hitting a ball off a tee as a 5 year old proved to be quite challenging. I couldn't seem to be coordinated enough, Andrew, to knock the ball off the tee until the very final game, and I got a hit. But I was in love with baseball. My dad and mom and my brother, we used to go to this baseball field in St. Paul, and we just played ball as a family, which I carried on with my family later in the 90s and 2000s. Um, so that was when I was first introduced to baseball. And then baseball cards is what really got me going. I started collecting in 1970, and that was just a whole lot of fun. And it was a big deal, Andrew, to open up that pack of baseball cards and see a Minnesota Twin, either the first card or the second card. I mean, I didn't even care about the other cards because I didn't know who players were on other teams when I was 8 years old. But to see a Minnesota Twin, and it was always my dream to get a Harmon Killebrew, which I never got. I think I traded for him later at a different time, but it was just a lot of fun. Baseball was the first sport that I was introduced to, and I just loved going to games at Metropolitan Stadium and also watching the Twins on the independent station in the Twin Cities, which at that time was Channel 9, excuse me, Channel 11, the old WTCN. So it was just a great time. I just loved baseball.
So we're going to get into a handful of things. You mentioned cards. We're going to talk about those. I know you said in the past episode your dad would give you guys like a nickel at some drugstore or something like that for cards. We're going to talk about your first baseball glove, all that stuff. But when it comes to 1972, the Minnesota Twins, is it on the radio, the TV, or in person, or in a magazine? Like, when are you first introduced to the team that's representing your home state?
Well, the Minnesota Twins, like I mentioned, was on the independent station in the Twin Cities. We only had four channels back then, Andrew. So there was CBS, NBC, and ABC, and then the independent station, um, which at that time was Channel 11 in the Twin Cities, and so they maybe broadcast 40 or 50 games a year. Most of them were road games. So I would be excited whenever I knew how to check the TV listings in the Sunday paper. So I'd be excited when I would see Twins baseball listed for maybe 3 days in a row or 6 days in a row if they were on the road. Um, and that was my first exposure, was watching them on TV, and and then listening to them on the radio on WCCO, which is 830 AM out of St. Paul, out of Minneapolis. And matter of fact, they're still on that station to this day. Uh, and I learned to listen to the Twins on the radio and understand what was going on, even though I was young. In 1972, I was only 10 years old, but I understood what was going on by listening to it on the radio, and certainly seeing it on TV. You have even more of an understanding. And then I learned how to read the results of a Twins game in the St. Paul paper the next day, which was really cool because I could get more inside information. You know, even when I was 10 years old, I maybe didn't understand all the big words that Twin Cities writers were using, but I understood enough that, especially if it was a game I watched on TV, that, oh, okay, so that's what happened on that play, or that's why they did that. So I was really gaining a knowledge of inside baseball at a young age, and loved watching it, loved listening to it. And in one year in 1972, my dad actually took us to 4 games. He usually tried to get us out there once or twice a year, but we went to 4 games that year, and it was just a blast. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, so we're going to focus on that. 1972. How old were you at this time?
I was 10 years old.
Okay, so you're going to a baseball game the first time. What do you remember about that first day? That first
You
game?
know, you know what? The Twins used to have a promotion every year called Bat Day, where every kid under the age of, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, got a baseball bat. And I think I still have some of those bats in my garage, Andrew. um, and it was a legitimate wooden bat, and and it was so much fun going to Bat Day. And the first one I ever went to was in April of 1972, and the Twins played the Oakland A's. Now this is when Reggie Jackson still played for the Oakland A's, and I remember Reggie Jackson hitting a mammoth home run in this game, just a high drive to right field. And but it didn't help the Oakland A's as the Twins won that game, and the Twins had a new guy at that time named Bobby Darwin, who hit a 2-run homer in that game. Harmon Killebrew singled in the first inning, and Bobby Darwin hit a 2-run homer. The Twins had an early lead, and everybody, all the kids, were pounding their baseball bats on the concrete of the pavilion in left field where we sat, and it was so loud. And I think they put a message on the scoreboard, Andrew, saying, please do not bang your bats, because it was kind of an older stadium, and I don't know if they were worried that it was going to collapse or not, but they instead encouraged everybody to raise their bat in the air. And so people were still pounding their bats on the concrete, and it was so loud, but it was so much fun. And like I said, the Twins won that game, and it was just cool to go to a game, see Reggie Jackson hit a home run, see Bobby Darwin, who was kind of a hero of mine in 1972. He hit a home run, and the Twins won the game. And gosh, that was so much fun.
You remember the final score?
5-4.
Okay. So this was, I mean, I'm just looking up 1972 as you're talking about. You said it was, I got April 23rd of 1972. Does that sound correct on a Sunday afternoon?
That'd be correct. It was a little cold that day. I remember wearing a windbreaker. Um, I don't remember what the temperature was, but it was still April. We were still coming out of winter. Most people know that live in the Midwest that April doesn't exactly mean you're getting spring weather. A lot of times you still have snow on the ground, and it's cold in April. So um, I remember being cold that day, and I remember the bats and how loud it was.
Gotcha. Wait, this says 824. I wonder if that's a miss website. What's the
Oh,
final?
4. I know Oakland had 4. Maybe the Twins scored. See, one of the things, and I was going to get into this later, but I can address it now. My dad, for whatever reason, was terrified or didn't like to deal with traffic after a game. Now, the Minnesota Twins had this huge parking lot. You know where the Mall of America is, Andrew. Um, the the stadium took up the space that the mall does now, and then you have all that space around it where IKEA is, and that used to just be a big old parking lot. So parking was never a problem. We didn't have to go to downtown Minneapolis or anything like that, like where the stadium is now. Um, it was a huge parking lot, but my dad always wanted to leave after the seventh inning. So unless the Twins were playing a double header, I never got to see the completion of a game because we always left after the seventh inning because my dad wanted to get back to his car and get out of there before 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people were all trying to leave at the same time. My dad didn't want to deal with that. So I never saw the end of a baseball game at Met Stadium with my dad.
Okay, that makes me curious. When was it that you saw the end of a baseball game? Like what year?
Well, I think it was in 1975 or 76, um, where my dad and I went to a doubleheader. Um, they don't have doubleheaders a whole lot in baseball anymore, but this was a scheduled doubleheader where they played the first game at 1 o'clock, and then after the completion of that game, the players would maybe get a 45-minute rest, and then they would play the second game. So in that scenario, and we only did it one time, where my dad and I sat through the entire game, and then we watched like maybe 2 innings of the second game, and then we took off.
Okay, so
So,
going back to that first game real quick, when did you know you were going? Was that a surprise the day of?
I don't think so. I remember the Twins played the Texas Rangers, and the game that we sat through, the Twins won 8-0, and a pitcher named Bill Campbell scattered 8 or 10 hits that game and got the shutout and got the win. Um, and I don't remember who started the second game. Don't even know who won the second game because we weren't there, and I don't remember looking in the paper the next day. I don't remember every game in the '70s,
No, I was
but
referring to the first game you went to in 72.
oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, in '72, my dad always let us know when we were going to a game. He'd maybe let us know a day or two ahead of time that, hey, would you like to go to a Twins game? And back then, Andrew, it only cost $2 or $3 to sit in left field, and that's where we always went. We sat in the left field bleachers. It was a double deck left field, so we would sit kind of far back enough where we had the overhang of the upper deck to kind of keep the shade on us a little bit in case it was a warm day. Um, if it was cold out, it didn't matter. But my dad liked to sit back a little ways. He didn't like to sit like right down by the fence. And if I remember right, it was general admission out in left field, which basically means that you don't have to sit in an assigned seat. You just get a ticket for that said left field bleachers, and you just went and found a place to sit. You didn't have to worry about sitting in row one, seat 32 or whatever. So it was general admission in left field.
So is it the whole family that's going? Do you guys ever like, do you go to the merchandise stand? Did you ever catch a ball? Like, what do you remember about those games?
Well, I always brought my glove because in case someone hit a home run out in left field, I had my glove. Um, never had a home run come anywhere near me though. um, And as far as your question about the whole family, my mom only came once in 1972, and that was for Mother's Day. And I have more on that story in a little bit. But to answer your question, um, yeah, it was just usually my dad and my brother Bruce and I that went to the games.
Okay, I want to know because I have a soft spot for this. Is this the same glove that you've always had?
No, I got that glove when I was 14 and I still have it. This was a little, I don't even know where they got it or when I got it, if it was birthday or Christmas, probably birthday, since my birthday is in April and that's when the start of the major league season usually is. It was just a little tiny glove and I could catch with it as long as someone didn't throw anything real hard at me.
Mhm.
Um, I if I use my dad taught me to use both hands right away when I was little. Don't try to catch with one hand. Try to catch the ball or try to catch the ball using my hand, my free hand, and my glove at the same time. So I would hang on to it because the glove wasn't very big. And if I remember right, you couldn't even really squeeze the glove to hold the baseball. So I had to use both hands to catch a ball.
Gotcha. Okay. I never knew it was a different glove. And I just bring that up because you have that same glove since you're 14 years old. And obviously it's like you're my dad, so we always played with that glove. I don't know if you ever knew this, but you had this big old peach glove that looks like this evil face for the listeners out there. And so the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask, we used to take your glove and act like that was like that wooden mask, and like it would like possess us, and we would go crazy when we put it on our face. That's a side story for the listeners out there. I know a few of them. Going back to 1972, are we jumping any more on this Oakland A's game, or are we going towards May of the Mother's Day game?
Well, Mother's Day is always the second Sunday of the month and of the month of May. And and it just so happened that that year that Mother's Day landed on May 14th, which is the latest possible day in May that Mother's Day can fall on. So it was May 14th, and the Minnesota Twins were playing the Milwaukee Brewers. So we at that time the Brewers were an American League team. They're National League now, but they were in the American League and big rival because people from Wisconsin would come over to Minnesota and watch the game. It wasn't that far away, about an hour from Hudson, Western Wisconsin territories, Menominee, Eau Claire. So people would come over and watch the Brewers because it was really their only opportunity to see the Brewers without having to drive to Milwaukee. So they could, if they were Brewers fans, they could come to Minnesota. So there was a lot of people there. And it was one of those rare times, Andrew, we actually didn't sit in left field. We sat down the third baseline and they just had benches there with no backs. And even as a little kid, I thought, this is hard, to sit on a bench, for a whole baseball game with nothing to lean back on. Um, but it was an old stadium. That's how they built stadiums back then. But the Twins won that game. The Twins had a pitcher named Jim Cott, who was recently inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he started that game. And he also hit a home run in that game, Andrew. This was a year before the American League adopted the designated hitter, so pitchers didn't have to bat anymore. So 1972 was the last year that American League pitchers could bat, and Jim Cott had two home runs that year, and I got to see one of them. And also, Andrew, that is the last time a Minnesota Twins pitcher has ever hit a home run and in any ball game. And I got to see it, and that was over 50 years ago, in 52 years ago in 1972. So that's what I remember most about that game. The Twins won 2-1 or 3-2, something like that, and Jim Cott got the win and hit that home run, and it was another exciting game to watch.
Did you have the Jim Cott baseball card?
I do have a Jim Cott baseball card,
Is it
and
Cardinals one?
I don't have a Cardinals one.
Okay.
I do have several when he was with the Twins, and this past April when when you and I and a couple of your siblings went to that Twins game in April against the Dodgers. One of the gifts I got in that game for my birthday was a Jim Cott bobblehead. Um, so there you go. And that immediately brought back memories that, Jim Cott pitched this great game, hit a home run, and now I have a bobblehead of Jim Cott.
That was presented to you by the mascot TC Bear, and I
Yes, yes. And thanks to you for orchestrating that whole thing.
A huge shout out to the Minnesota Twins. That organization could have been like easier, like emailing and sending all that stuff. But May 14th, that was Mother's Day in 1972. They won 4-2 that day. Um, Out of curiosity, was your dad like extra nervous with that like Wisconsin crowd base against Minnesota, like all those extra people there?
Um, that usually didn't bother my dad, and as long as we got out of there after the seventh inning, like I mentioned earlier. But my parents are from Wisconsin, so they no, they weren't concerned, about rowdiness, and this was the early '70s. Andrew, baseball crowds were nowhere near as rowdy as they can be today. Baseball, as a rule, doesn't have real rowdy fans like football or hockey does. Um, um, Granted, maybe people are more vocal and so forth, demonstrative today, but back in the '70s, that wasn't a problem.
So yes, we are back in the 70s. I'm gonna like you're just gonna go for a while. What else about the Twin season, 1972, 10 years old, speaks to you?
Well, I went to another game. This wasn't this wasn't with my dad. It was with a church, um, and it wasn't even my church, I don't think. But one of my best friends at the time, his name was Jimmy Foster. He's no longer with us. Um, we went to this game with a youth group, and the Twins again played the Brewers, and it was kind of a rainy day. And Bobby Darwin, again, who I mentioned earlier, hit a grand slam in that game. So, Andrew, it was the first grand slam I had ever seen. Um, and it was just really cool to see him hit this home run because, again, I was sitting down the third base side, and you could see the trajectory of the ball, just kind of loop down the left field line and landed in the left field seats for a grand slam. Um, and then I remember it started pouring. Um, I think the Twins had like an 8-0 lead, and it started pouring. Um, and so they called a rain delay, and we had nothing over down the third base line. There was no overhang, so we were just getting poured on. So we kind of tried to get down to somewhere where we weren't getting rained on, and I think they did start the game up again. But we were so soaked that we wound up leaving after, I don't know, the fourth or fifth inning or something. They did play the game. I think the Twins won 8-4. Um, and it was like an afternoon game, like a Monday afternoon game or something, again against the Brewers. Um, and uh, that was a lot of fun. Again, I don't remember a lot of the details on that because it wasn't a family thing. It wasn't with my dad and my brother. It was the first time I'd gone to a Twins game without my dad or my brother. So, um, which was okay, but kind of missed that family thing. And then we saw one other game in 1972, and I don't remember who that one was against, but the Twins also won that game. It was later in the season. So I saw four Twins games that year at Old Metropolitan Stadium. They won all four of them. And I just remember 1972 because of that. Going to Twins games, that camaraderie with my family. And that was a cool thing I had with my dad was going to Twins games. And a couple of times he and I just went too, where my brother didn't want to go or he wasn't available or something.
Is there a certain like shirt or jersey you always had to wear, or like a hat when you went to these games?
Well, I think I had a little Twins hat. I don't remember my parents buying it. I'm guessing my mom got it at a Goodwill because we we weren't in. I wouldn't say we were impoverished, but we didn't have a lot of money, and so my mom visited Goodwill quite a bit, and I think I did have a Twins hat, so I'm guessing I got it at a Goodwill, and I wore it faithfully to every game. Back then they didn't have jerseys and stuff like they do now, Andrew. So you'd maybe find a Twins T-shirt somewhere. You could buy them at the game, um, but my dad never spent money at the game. If it wasn't something we got free, like the bat day I mentioned earlier, we generally didn't get any merchandise. Generally didn't even get anything to eat. One time, my dad bought a hot dog for us because he was hungry. Um, but usually, unless it was a really hot day, he'd get something for us to drink so we'd stay hydrated. But generally, we just went, paid to see the game, and didn't get anything else, and then we left.
What do you remember about actually seeing what were they wearing? You mentioned they didn't sell jerseys. Was it the light blue jerseys at the time? I mean, were people hanging out like in a dugout, or was it different from what you see today?
The twin in 1972, the Twins had brand new uniforms, and they were white, and Twins was spelled out in red with black trim, just like the normal Twins of today. And then around the sleeves, they had black and red striping, and and then around the waist, they also had black and red striping. They were sort of elastic belts, which was big for a while. Major League Baseball tried that. I think the Yankees and Cubs were the only two that didn't. They stayed with the traditional pinstripe look. But all Major League Baseball teams went to sort of these elastic belts with fancy striping and stuff, and very colorful for a while watching teams play. The Twins didn't come up with those blue jerseys that you're talking about, Andrew, until and they only wore those on the road. And I think they started wearing those in '74. In '72, they were wearing a gray version of that before they went to the light blue in '74. But those Twins jerseys, I I'd like to have one of them now. I mean, you couldn't buy them back then because that just wasn't a thing in stores. Buying replica jerseys, authentic replications of jerseys in any sport, they just didn't do that back then. Um, but nowadays you can find that stuff anywhere, but you got to spend quite a bit of money. I just looked up one of those recently. A Harmon Killebrew 1972 jersey cost $200. So, yeah, very pricey to go back and buy one of those and relive your childhood.
Is that kind of what you're seeing when you look at this picture? For those listening, Google the Minnesota Twins yearbook in 1972. So do you
Yes,
remember this?
yep, I have that yearbook, and that's when they introduced those jerseys. Exactly what I'm talking about. On the left there is Tony Oliva, and on the right is Harmon Killebrew, and they're modeling the new uniforms because up until that time the Twins wore pinstripes in their first 11 years of existence. So that's the uniforms they came out with, and as a 10-year-old, I just thought those were the coolest things. And Andrew, I tried to make my own jerseys. I got a white sweatshirt that my mom said she didn't care what I did with it, and I cut off the sleeves and I put electrical tape around the sleeves for the red and black, and then I tried my best to spell out Twins with with black trim using electrical tape. And then I put, I don't remember what number I put on the back. I think I just put number one back there because it was easy. Um, and then at the bottom of the shirt, I put the black and red striping again. So it looked like I had an official Twins jersey made by a 10-year-old with electrical tape.
Do you still have this?
Oh, no, no. I mean, you couldn't wash it because it had tape on it. So, yeah, those are long gone. I kept them probably for, I don't know, 8, 10 years. But yeah, eventually I just threw them away
And then
because
what's
I made several teams. So,
what was that?
because I made jerseys of a few other teams, the Oakland A's and the Atlanta Braves, and I don't remember who else, but yeah, I tried to make my own jerseys because I wanted my own jerseys so bad, and I guess I should have pitched that idea to Nike and Adidas when I was a 10-year-old, and maybe would have made some money.
What was the first jersey you end up getting then?
For real?
Yeah.
Well, the first baseball jersey I probably got. Um, Boy, it wasn't that long ago. My wife picked up a Cal Ripken jersey at a garage sale for me. Cal Ripken played for the Orioles, um, and is in the Hall of Fame now. Um, and then, funny you brought it up. Just a couple of days ago, a friend of mine at work gave me a Joe Mauer jersey that he found um, at a rummage sale for a quarter. So I washed it twice, and it's hanging in my closet now. So, um, as far as baseball jerseys, don't have a lot of those. I started collecting football jerseys in the early '80s.
Gotcha. And real last thing about this picture, what's up with those socks? Like those
Well,
and
those are
those
called
sports shoes?
they're called stirrups,
Okay.
and and that's what baseball players wore. They don't wear those anymore, um, but that was just the look. And for years, that's what players wore. They were white socks with these black stirrups over them. Some teams had red, some teams had green, depending on what their colors were. I remember the Oakland A's in the game that I saw had yellow uniforms with green stirrups. They look really cool, but that's what baseball players wore uh, during Andrew, a long time. The 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I don't remember when they stopped wearing those. They don't wear them anymore, but that was a thing in baseball for a good 50 years.
Gotcha. So going back to like 1972, watching baseball, being a part of it, is there anything else that kind of like sticks in your mind, like specifically about me as a kid and the Minnesota Twins baseball team?
Well, I was a nerd in 1972, so I thought it would be fun to keep my own statistics. So I decided I was going to write down every home run that the Twins hit in 1972, the date, against what team it was, and what the final score was of that game. Um, and I remember Bobby Darwin hit 22 home runs, or I'm sorry, yeah, he hit 22 home runs that year. Harmon Killebrew hit 26. Jim Cott had a couple. They had a rookie named Eric Soderholm who hit 13. The Twins as a team, I think, had 91, either 83 or 93, 91, somewhere in there. They didn't break 100. Um, but yeah, that's the kind of nerd I was in '72, Andrew. I kept track of every Twins homer that they hit that year.
So wrapping up two questions quick. Who was your favorite player? Did you imagine that you were him when you were playing baseball? And how did that 1972 season end for you as a fan?
Well, the Twins in '72, I think, I don't remember what their record was, but um, I think the season might have started a little bit late. Um, you mentioned that game was in April 23rd. And I think they missed like maybe the first 15 or 16 games because there was a baseball strike going on, Andrew. So they had bat day right away to kind of generate some interest because people don't like it when there's strikes, and they wanted to make sure people were going to still come out to the games. Um, so the Twins wound up finishing that season, 1972, winning 72 games and losing 72 games. So very, very odd that they were 72 and 72 in 1972. Um, and as far as a favorite player, because he was new to the team, Bobby Darwin, he hit 7 homers in April, and he was just a lot of fun to watch. He didn't have a great batting average, but man, he could hit the long ball. And of course, Harmon Killebrew, always a favorite because he's a Twins legend. My brother was more into players like Rod Carew, um, because he was more of a pure hitter and just a smooth player. And I think he won the batting title that year. So Tony Oliva was kind of at the end of his career at that point. So um, yeah, just a lot of good players. I had a few favorites. Um, and as far as the season itself, Uh, I think the Twins finished in third or fourth place that year. The Oakland A's were a really good team, went on to win the division, won the World Series. And that's mostly what I remember about 72.
Did they go to the playoffs that year?
No, back then there was um, a West Division and an East Division in the American League. And in 72, the Detroit Tigers won the East. And in the West, where the Twins were, the Oakland A's won that division. Oakland beat Detroit in the playoffs, in the American League playoffs, and then went to the World Series and beat the Cincinnati Reds in 7 games.
Were you interested in any other teams and watching like everything baseball, or was it just the Twins?
Actually, I was because I was so interested in the Twins that year. That continued on through the playoffs, even though the Twins weren't in the playoffs. I watched um, all of the World Series that year. The Oakland A's and Cincinnati Reds had a wonderful World Series, and I can remember a lot, even to this day, of watching that game as a 10-year-old, of watching all 7 games because it was on a major network at that time, probably CBS. And I can remember watching all of those games. And I can remember Reggie Jackson didn't play in the World Series because he was hurt. But I do remember other stars in that series. Uh, Vida Blue pitching for Oakland, and Pete Rose was playing then for Cincinnati. And I remember a lot of watching it. And Oakland had a guy named Gene Tennis that I think was the most valuable player of the World Series. He had 2 or 3 home runs, maybe four, and had some good plays in the field. So, yeah, to answer your question, Andrew, baseball carried over because of the Twins, and I got to learn more about baseball by watching other teams and seeing how good teams really played the game.
So this is my last question. We were at the Mall of America recently, for your birthday, like you said in April. So we were at the Mall of America recently. When you're there, being in that area, that building, does it like take you back? Does it remind you of all that, or is it just so completely different now?
Well, not so much anymore. I've been to the Mall of America many, many times. But when I first went to the Mall of America, and I didn't go there right away because, I kind of had my personal vendetta against the Mall of America for coming into Minnesota and tearing down a stadium that I grew up in, much how you feel about the Metrodome, which no longer exists as well. Um, and that's how I felt about Metropolitan Stadium. So I didn't want to go to the Mall of America. Um, and I think we went as a family for someone's birthday for the very first time is when we went to the Mall of America because somebody wanted to go there. And and if I'm not mistaken in Nickelodeon universe, or at that time it was Charlie Brown Land or something. Um, Home plate still exists somewhere in that area, and so I got to stand on home plate um, and just kind of look around a little bit and try to picture what the old stadium looked like. So um, I don't think about it too much anymore, but yeah, for a long time, Andrew, I didn't like going there for that reason.
The Mall of America does bring back memories. So does that home plate. And so does Bryan Lee on every episode of that 70s pod. You can find him. He collects jerseys, baseball gloves, and also action figures. Go to SCVW Action Figures on Instagram and follow everything he has going on there. At the next episode, we might talk about more Twins, more music. Bryan Lee, good night and thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.